Friday. We have officially reached another Duke men's basketball game day. Blue Devils back in action a little bit later tonight. Let's talk again about their season opening victory against Jacksonville and what's ahead for Jon Scheyer and company as they get set for the next few days in the life of Duke men's basketball. Here we go. Today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils starts right now.
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. My name is JJ Jackson, and it's so great to have you here with us on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Locked On Blue Devils is a daily podcast devoted to everything going on in the life of Duke athletics. Duke football all of a sudden finds themselves bowl eligible with another big game coming up this weekend. But today we're going to be talking about Duke men's basketball as they get set for game 2 of the season. And my buddy Brendan Marks of The Athletic is going to be here with us on today's show. Today's episode is brought to you by Underdog. Underdog Fantasy with the promo code Locked On and get on your first deposit doubled up to $100. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to follow us on Twitter at LO_Blue Devils. And I'm on Twitter at _JJ_Jackson_. Make sure that you're following and subscribing to our podcast for free wherever you get them. Also, be sure to watch the show each and every day on YouTube. Your support means the absolute world to us. Without further ado, let's bring in my good buddy, Brendan Marks of The Athletic is here with us. And Brendan, we have finally made it. Here we are in the life of college basketball season. Thanks for being back with me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for having me.
What a time of year it is. We saw Duke get their season started on Monday with that win against Jacksonville. I talked about this a little bit earlier in the week, but you've been covering this program for many years now at this point. There was kind of this final culmination, so to speak, that Jon Scheyer walked out as the head coach for a game that matters. And now it's kind of like, okay, this is normal. Of course, after Mike Krzyzewski holds that post for 42 years, you're bound to be kind of confused by everything that's transpiring. It's felt like it's gone on forever because we knew an entire full season beforehand that this would take place. But getting to be looking at what took place in that game on Monday, what was it like to finally see Jon Scheyer step into that post?
Yeah, I mean, I think he said it pretty well himself, but even for knowing that this was something that was going to happen a year and a half ago, it was still weird. I mean, it was still a little bit strange. Like, you're used to seeing, Mickey Krzyzewski up in her, traditional seat in the aisle in the second level of the stands. And you're used to seeing, the assistant coaches sort of really on their P's and Q's. I mean, I was even used to, the way that Coach K would stand for the national anthem, and the way, with his sort of military background. So, you look at all that and then you compare it to like, okay, here comes Jon Scheyer, and like the assistants are acting a little differently. They are laughing on the bench. They are having a good time. He's got his wife and his parents behind the bench, sort of like, like they would be at a middle school dance recital, like just absolutely beaming. So yeah, I think we've known this was coming for a long time, but until you actually see it in the flesh, like actually doing it is different. And it certainly was different, but I was happy for Jon, happy that the way the night went. I think he did a really good job, given the circumstances of everything. You could tell that he and I think his players were nervous for the first couple of minutes. But then once things really got underway, he snapped right back into it, and Duke basketball was off into a new era.
It's just one game. It'll probably take a little bit more. But again, just like you said, the end game things as well, right? Like towards the back half of his career, Coach K it's just well known. He was going to sit down for the majority of the game and do his coaching and that sort of thing from a more comfortable position. And just seeing how much Jon Scheyer gets up and walks back and forth and engaging with the officials like Coach K was known for and that sort of thing. Those in-game things are going to be interesting to kind of learn in the next few games as well.
Yeah, for sure. And then obviously, there's also the tactical element of it. There's looking at some of the plays and sets that he wanted to run. And, I've had a lot of people ask me, like, how similar is Duke going to look under John Shire? And obviously we didn't know until we, finally got to see them a little bit. And,
Right.
and I don't think we can have a full grasp after one game. But, to me, there were basically two options. It was either going to be a Mike Krzyzewski playbook with some John Shire tweaks, or it was going to be a John Shire playbook with some Mike Krzyzewski tendencies. And I think it's the latter. I think there are much more, they're still going to run horns. They're still going to run a lot of their conventional sets. But, this is a guy who really values diversity of thought in basketball. There's a reason he brought in Jay Lucas, and it's not just because Jay Lucas is a great recruiter. It's because Jay Lucas is a really promising young basketball coach, and he wanted to have somebody who could come in from outside of the family and go, hey, look, I know you might have done it this way for X number of years, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't evaluate and see if that's the best way. He's someone who gets a lot of influence from European basketball. Monty Williams, Chris Finch, Steve Kerr, positionless, versatility. Those are all things that are really important to him. And so I think that you're going to continue to see his rosters and the tactics that they execute sort of reflect those, inclinations that we saw in the first game.
Second game of the season for Duke coming up tonight. They're back at home inside Cameron Indoor Stadium, taking on South Carolina Upstate, specifically on the offensive end of the floor, defensively as well. Did you walk away with Mark Mitchell being the player you were most impressed with on Monday night, or was it somebody else, Brendan?
He's certainly up there. And, I think he's a really fascinating story because coming into the season, he obviously was probably the least heralded of all of the 5-star recruits that Shire was bringing in. And actually, in talking to some people around the league who, obviously Duke is on their radar in terms of draft prospects well over a year in advance, Mark Mitchell was the guy that not everyone was sold on. And I think, there was this idea that he had this tremendous lack of skill and it was going to take time for that lack of skill to sort of catch up to the college game. And what we saw is that is just wrong. What we saw is that if you are 6'8" with a 7+ foot wingspan and you're a crazy athlete and you're a locked in defender and you have a relentless motor, you can still make things happen. So yeah, certainly he was incredibly impressive. The other guy that I would put in that conversation is Ryan Young. And listen, I knew that Ryan Young was going to be a player. I knew that he was going to be somebody who, I don't think he's going to start once Dereck Lively is back healthy, which, hopefully is this week, if not next week against Kansas. But Ryan Young's going to play. I mean, he's got grown man moves. He is basically a lock to score one-on-one in the post. Defensively, he doesn't offer you a ton. He's going to get lost in space a little bit. But in terms of organization, communication, defensively, at least hitting his rotations that he's supposed to, and then offensively, you know what you're getting. Like, that is a valuable player. So I was really impressed with the two of them, probably more than anybody. But, but all across the board, it was a pretty encouraging debut.
71-44, the final score as Duke defeats Jacksonville to open up the season. Let's look ahead and talk about some more individual performances after our first time out here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Locked On Blue Devils here today is brought to you by our friends at SimpliSafe. If you've thought about securing your home with home security but have been putting it off, you'll want to listen up. Right now, Locked On Blue Devils listeners can order the #1 rated SimpliSafe home security system for 50% off. This is their biggest offer of the year, and you won't want to miss it. It's so incredible, you've got to make this a part of your home. In an emergency, 24/7 professional monitoring agents use Fast Protect technology exclusively from SimpliSafe to capture critical evidence and verify that the threat is real so you can get priority police response. SimpliSafe is whole home security with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door. HD security cameras for inside and outside. Smarter ways to detect motion that alert you only when a threat is real. Don't miss your chance to save big on the only security system that I would recommend. Get 50% off the new SimpliSafe system at simplisafe.com/lockedoncollege. This is the biggest discount of the year, so don't wait. At simplisafe.com/lockedoncollege, there's no safe like SimpliSafe. Moving forward here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils, JJ Jackson alongside my buddy Brendan Marks of The Athletic. So we look back at Monday night. Again, Duke the victory, 71-44 against Jacksonville. We talked a little bit about Mark Mitchell. We talked about Ryan Young on the inside. Ryan Young didn't miss a single shot from the floor. 12 points in his Duke debut, which is pretty special. Jeremy Roach up to his usual business, 16 points, all of them in the first half. But what about some of those secondary guards, Brendan, that we saw from Duke when you factor in Tyrese Proctor, Jacob Grandison, Jalen Blake's looking impressive? Kind of talk about that secondary guard unit there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in terms of who's probably the most impressive in the opener, it was Jalen Blake's. And I think that, last year he was obviously not a part of the rotation, was very much a developmental guy, is going to be a multi-year player at Duke. I mean, he already is, but
Yeah.
will continue to be. But if you had told me last year that Jalen Blake's was capable of making 2 threes and impacting a game in a positive way, the first game of Jon Scheyer's debut, I would have laughed in your face.
Right.
Because this is a guy who just looks completely different from last year. In terms of his body, you can see, especially in his upper body, he's refined his frame. He's stronger. He's more cut. You could see him get to the rim a little bit more easily because of that. He's not afraid to go into traffic. That is sort of his offensive go-to right now. The fact that he was a guy who was not just open for some of those corner threes, and again, that's a set that Scheyer incorporated that I really like, that I think we're going to see a lot of from Duke this year, that resulted in Blake's getting his first corner three. But that is something that was not in his bag at all a year ago. I mean, his shot looked a lot like mine, and it is much, much better than mine now. So, he's a guy that I think is going to play a role this year. I think he's going to come in. He's a ball handler. He's a defensive pit bull. He's going to make things happen. He's going to play with effort. Like, that's a guy who sparks energy, and especially in a game, maybe, at some point later on in the season, if Duke comes out lethargic, that's the kind of guy you need to sort of snap you out of a funk. As far as the other two, Tyrese Proctor, I think I struggled a little bit. Obviously was not having some of those easy layups fall that traditionally will for him. Don't panic. He's going to be fine. I picked him to be ACC newcomer of the year this year for good reason. I think you saw, he had a couple of different times, his wiggle, his burst, his passing instincts. I just think they're really all top class. And, I know it's not all bad for him. He still had the opening assist of the Jon Scheyer era. So not all bad for Tyrese. And then for Jacob Grandison, yeah, he's one of those guys who I think is going to give you whatever you need. If it is 3-point shooting on any given night, posting him up in the corners is great. I thought he was a really effective screener, especially for his size the other night, which is something that, being a veteran player, having played in the Big Ten, having to deal with some more physical, guards and wings, he's used to that. So I think that's going to be valuable for Duke moving forward. There are going to be games where he has 5 points. There are going to be games probably where he has 25 points. I think he's one of those, he's going to be in contention to be sort of that ACC sixth man of the year. But, by and large, I think you saw what you wanted to see from that group, especially knowing that when Dariq Whitehead eventually comes back, all of those guys are sort of going to be pushed down the totem pole of peg, and then their roles will align even a little bit better with where they're at.
Yeah, something really important just to remember is that Dereck Lively II and Dariq Whitehead weren't out there on the floor for Duke, and so you've still got these two major pieces with what you want to be this season that you've got to incorporate at some point in the year, and Duke will certainly get to that. So a little bit of the offensive end there for all of these guys, but more specifically on the defense, Brendan, Jacksonville only scored 44 points in a 40-minute college basketball game. What was it about Duke's defense in particular that made it so difficult for the Dolphins to get going?
Yeah, I think, the thing that impressed me the most was the cohesion for a team that has 11 new guys and 7 freshmen. Like, that's the sort of team that usually needs a couple of weeks to get its defense in shape.
Yeah.
That's especially with a new head coach too at the same time. Like, I think back to last year at the start of North Carolina season, and, I compare them because it's a similar situation. New staff, new players. North Carolina's defense was a train wreck for the first 2.5 months of the year, if not longer. So the fact that Duke came out so organized on that end, I think really speaks to how much of a priority that was for Jon Scheyer in the offseason. He said the whole course of the summer, defense is going to be our bread and butter. That's what we're going to have to sort of lean on, especially because this is not a team. Let's be honest. This is not a team that has a Paolo Banchero. There is not a go-to guy. I think there's a lot of versatility. There's a lot of depth, but there isn't that slam dunk superstar per chance. So I thought the defense was really impressive in that category. Again, going back to the way that he has built this roster, it's so versatile, and it's versatile to the point where they can switch everything they want to. They can change the way they play different, ball screen coverages. They don't necessarily have to just play drop coverage. They can hedge, they ice on the side. Like, there are different things that they can do. And so that's only possible when you've got guys like a Mark Mitchell, especially. He's going to be a linchpin for them defensively because No joke. He can defend point guards and centers.
Mm-hmm.
It's freaky what he can do. And him being able to slide seamlessly on the perimeter is just going to really open up the things that Duke wants to do as a team defensively. And I was probably more impressed on that side of the ball than I was offensively, if I'm being honest.
Really impressive stuff from Duke in their opening victory of the season, 71-44 against Jacksonville. Now you got to move forward. Now you've got South Carolina Upstate coming into town a little bit later tonight. And then you've got, of course, the looming matchup in the Champions Classic on Tuesday when Duke gets set to take on Kansas. So we'll talk about that after our final break here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Today's episode is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. This is absolutely the easiest place to spice up college football season. While you're watching our favorite team play well, you want to make sure that you're competing in Underdog Fantasy as well. It's easy to play and available in over 30 states. Just pick between 2 and 5 players across any team. It doesn't have to just be on Duke football, and decide if they will finish higher or lower. For example, as we get set for this weekend's football games for Duke, will Riley Leonard have higher or lower than 150 passing yards? You make those decisions on Underdog Fantasy. It's one of the easiest fantasy games to play out there, and you can win cold hard cash in one single game. Sign up with the promo code LOCKEDON, and Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100. Get $100 or deposit $100 and get $100 free to go along with it. Go to UnderdogFantasy.com or find the Underdog Fantasy app in the App Store. That's Underdog Fantasy with the promo code LOCKEDON. Get in on the college football pick'em action today. Moving forward, final few moments here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. JJ Jackson alongside my buddy Brendan Marks of The Athletic. Basketball season is back. It is important, as we do multiple times throughout the year, to remind folks, Brendan, that you are also an excellent reporter for North Carolina Tar Heels basketball, in addition to Duke. But at The Athletic, folks can read your coverage. Tell us a little bit about your work.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the plug. All my stuff is over at theathletic.com. I'm biased, obviously, but I think that we've got the best comprehensive sports writing staff in the country. Any sport you want, any league you want, any team you want, we've got stuff on all of it. Our college basketball staff is the biggest in the country. You've got dedicated coverage on Duke every day. You've got national perspectives, and especially, I'm excited next week, Champions Classic. It's a big day for Duke. It's a big day for yours truly. Got a big story coming out that day. So definitely check it out. If you haven't already, consider it, and I'll try and make it worth your while.
Yeah, no, I can't wait to read that then. All right. So Champions Classic is exactly what I want to talk about. Duke and Kansas, big stage. We're used to, in years past, having this game be the very first Tuesday of the year to get us going. It happened to be Election Day on Tuesday this year, kind of had to move some things around. And so we'll have the Champions Classic this coming Tuesday, Duke having played 2 games going into the matchup. And we're assuming that Duke's going to be able to take care of business against South Carolina Upstate a little bit later tonight. So going into a game like Kansas, what stands out with this matchup in particular for Duke?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's going to be interesting is this is not the team that won the national championship in April. This is a very different roster. You had multiple guys leave. David McCormick gone, Christian Brown gone, Ochai Agbaji gone. And while Jalen Wilson is back, he is sort of the lone, proven quantity who is coming back for Kansas. He's the guy who is going to be at the top of Duke's scouting report. But, there are other guys there. Grady Dick's a great player. Ernest Duda had a really, really nice debut. The thing that I'm most interested for on Duke's side of things is looking at the continued offensive evolution of the team, especially assuming that Dereck Lively is going to be back for that game. I think that defensively, obviously, his rim protection is going to help. We saw that against Jacksonville. That is not an area that necessarily was Kyle Filipowski or Ryan Young's strength right out of the gate. He's going to be able to provide that. But offensively, what does this team look like when you do have, another big and another caliber of his recruit, coming into the situation? I think you're now looking at a situation where, okay, Lively is probably going to start. And when he does, what does that do to the rest of the rotation? It means that, okay, maybe Ryan Young and Kyle Filipowski are not starting, or maybe only one of them is starting. I don't anticipate that Dariq Whitehead is going to be back for the Kansas game, unfortunately. So maybe it's a situation where you have Lively and Filipowski and Mitchell, and you just have an absolutely gigantic sort of perimeter and front court. That's very possible. But offensively, that's what I want to see. How do you incorporate Dereck Lively? Can you get Tyrese Proctor going a little bit more? Jeremy Roach hit 4 threes against Jacksonville. I do not know if that's sustainable. And if it's not, where's your 3-point production coming from? So, Mark Mitchell hit a couple, and I mean, his shot almost looks like a soccer throw-in, but it went in. I don't know that is also replicable. So, I'm looking to see against a team of obviously much more comparable caliber, what is Duke's true offensive, capacity at this point? And they're not going to be at full strength until they've had Dariq and Dereck back for a couple of weeks, but we'll get a taste of it against Kansas. And this is really I don't want to say it's the last big important game before they head to Portland. And, that one is where we're really going to learn a lot about Duke, but this is certainly going to be the biggest test for Jon Scheyer thus far.
Yeah, outside shooting is so interesting because, every time you're watching a Duke basketball game, it's well known and documented as the broadcast is moving along. When that first three-pointer goes in, the 1,000,000th game in a row that Duke basketball has made a three-point shot, and wow, they're setting records every single game in college basketball. But when you look at what they were able to do in the first game of the season, you mentioned the 4 threes from Roach. Mark Mitchell had a couple. Jalen Blakes, like we said, had a couple of three-point makes. Is that something that can be duplicated night to night to night? And then Filipowski was the other player that had a double 2 3-point makes there. So 10 total for Duke. Where is the outside shooting coming from? Will kind of be a big question.
Yeah, that's sort of, that's one of my biggest questions about, what Duke's ceiling eventually looks like, is because I don't believe that that's sustainable from Mark Mitchell and Jalen Blakes. Kyle Filipowski, yes. Jacob Grandison, yes. When Dariq Whitehead is back, yes. Tyrese Proctor is going to be better than he was. Jeremy Roach will hit a couple of threes. But none of those guys is a marksman, a true marksman. And maybe one of them can be. Jacob Grandison is from the corners. That's, he was brought in to be that guy, but you need more than one person who's capable of doing that. The guy to me who really sort of swings that situation in this regard is Jeremy Roach, because he played an outstanding floor game against Jacksonville. He was everything Jon Scheyer needed him to be. And if he's able to continue hitting threes at that rate, suddenly it changes the way that defenses have to look at Duke's offense. Because that was not Jeremy Roach a year ago. He was a driver. He was a finisher inside. He was a disher. If he can also be a competent, I'm not saying he's got to hit 45% of his threes, but, if he can hit 36, 37, 38% of them, and teams have to really start respecting him a little bit more, that's going to open up driving lanes. It's going to open up cutting lanes. I just think it's going to do a lot to help Duke's offense in the long run if he's able to replicate that production.
Can't wait to see what it looks like. Again, Tuesday night, Duke gets set to take on Kansas. We mentioned Dereck Lively likely on his way back for Duke basketball, which is great. Dariq Whitehead on the other end still looks like we're a little bit away from his season debut. And Brendan, it's interesting. You go back to the initial foot fracture, the timeline that you hear and that you see in place, and just being positive like we always are. It's like, okay, no preseason, no exhibition action for him. That's 6 to 8 weeks. Look, that lines up perfectly with the start of the year. All of a sudden, here we are in the year, and we're still waiting for Dariq Whitehead. So at this point, what truly is the best case, kind of what's going on in Dariq Whitehead's world right now? Yeah,
I don't think there's anything nefarious going on. I think it's, a similar situation that you've seen play out the past couple of years.
Sure.
AJ Griffin played in the opener last year. Did he make a difference? No. Did he make a difference until December? No. I think he played 2 minutes against Gonzaga.
Right.
So, Jason Tatum, he missed 6-8 games at the start of his freshman year. It turned out okay for Duke and for him.
No doubt.
I think it's going to be one of those situations where, he is finally being cleared to play through contact. And that's the biggest issue, is when you have a guy who has the future that he has, who has the trajectory that he has individually, you have to protect that investment. If you are the team, you don't want to do anything that's going to be detrimental to him. And also, if you're him, you have to protect your future. You have to almost protect him from himself a little bit, because I'm sure he wants to be out there. Being on the sidelines is really hard and really not fun, especially when you're somebody who's as good as he is and who is going to have the role that he is. So, I think that we're probably talking about, I would not expect him, like I said, to play in either of these next 2 games. you're talking about really Portland. PK, I think, is, a reasonable timeline to expect him to be coming back. To be expecting him to be a 30-minute per game guy at that point, I don't think is reasonable or fair. That's something that's going to take some time. So, but he is finally being cleared for contact again. That's the biggest thing. That's sort of the next step in his progression. Once he's cleared for contact and he, sort of proves himself in that capacity, then it gets to becoming a conditioning thing, making sure that you're not tossing a guy out there to the wolves, feeding into the fire.
Yeah.
But he is certainly progressing, maybe not as quickly as Duke fans would like, but when you understand, this sort of 10,000 foot view of the situation, I can understand why things have ultimately gone this way. And look, let's be honest, 6 to 8 weeks was, an unofficial timetable.
Sure.
It was also an ambitious one. It was an optimistic one. When I had a similar injury in my foot when I was in college, it took my foot 8 weeks, and I certainly was not a high-level athlete. So I think it's something that's different for everybody. And listen, he's going to be back when the games matter most. And I actually think that's going to be one of the exciting things, is that with him out, guys who maybe would not have had the role with him in there have gotten more minutes and more time. I don't know that Jalen Blakes gets as much time. I don't know that Jaden Schutt gets in the game. So there are benefits. There are silver linings to take from it as well.
Fun stuff, and we'll see how Dariq Whitehead continues to move along and how Duke basketball continues to go throughout the rest of the season. And Brendan, the best part about all of this is that we've got many more visits with you throughout the year. So very much greatly appreciate your time each and every time you stop by Locked On Blue Devils. Thanks for being here today, man.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me. And we'll have a lot more to talk about the rest of the season.
Perfect. That's our good pal, Brendan Marks of The Athletic. Make sure you're checking out his work and the rest of the Athletic crew. They've got amazing coverage all across sports, and in particular, Brendan's work of covering Duke basketball. What a fun show it's been. What a fun week it's been here with Locked On Blue Devils. Duke football going for their 7th win of the season tomorrow. Best of luck to that Duke squad, and we'll see what Duke men's hoops looks like a little bit later tonight when they get set to take on South Carolina Upstate. As always, we'll talk to you on Monday. My name is JJ Jackson. Thank you and good day.